welcome back to our TBC Blocktalk, a podcast by the TUM Blockchain Club, which is a student initiative from Munich, where we talk about technology meeting opportunities in the field of blockchain and Web3. And today we have a special guest, Nico Schapeler, who is the co-founder and CTO of Arcium, and he was a TUM student and a software engineer by heart, I would say. Is that a good description?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's pretty accurate. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. We also have a second person sitting with us. It's Lucas Aschenbach. He's part of the TUM Blockchain Club as well, driving forward our education team. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So let's start. Nico, can you tell us about how your career started in Web3 from being a TUM student to founding a successful startup?
Yeah, for sure. So actually my career started a little bit earlier than being a TUM student actually. I first got into crypto in like 2016 or something like that. And initially the way I started out was just, I heard about crypto, and at that time, being a little bit impressionable to some extent, but I was quite libertarian to some extent and always thought, if everything was, decentralized, no one had control over anything, everything was, free, then the world would be a much better place. Like now I have a little bit more nuisance, but still that's what got me interested in it initially. And then I was very lucky to have, while I was in high school, a friend of mine whose dad actually founded a blockchain startup at the time that was called Rivets, which worked on using trust execution environments to secure key material for interacting with blockchains inside of smartphones. And through that, I was quite lucky to be able to work with very experienced engineers and basically learned a ton about not just blockchain development, but also about security, cryptography, this type of thing, just by the nature of the company. And so by the time I was done working with that, like for a year and a half or something like this, I decided to study, went off to TUM because that just seemed like, very entrepreneurial university, had good programs and things like this, and basically continued my blockchain journey over there. Did some blockchain research at uni. Also was part of Start Munich, which is this entrepreneurship club where I, together with one of my now co-founders, founded a blockchain group to some extent. But basically through that, I kept up the interest in blockchain, and at some point met two of my co-founders through uni, Yannick and Julian. And then the way this essentially started out was just one evening. Julian and I already knew each other and decided to take Yannick, who was a new member in this club, out for dinner for some burritos. And basically this was end of 2021 or something like that. We decided, we're talking about blockchain, and at this time the new sexy and upcoming chain was Solana. So we were telling Yannick all about it, how it's so much faster, it's so much cheaper, blah, blah, blah. And so he basically said, if it's so great, maybe you can send me some Sol, which is the native token of Solana, so I can try it out at home. And then I was like, yeah, well, I don't really want to do that because then you can see my full wallet and you can see all my past transactions and all my future transactions, what assets I hold, and so on. And this basically sparked an idea in our head, which was that even though privacy tooling already existed, things like Zcash, no one really used them for the larger protocols. And essentially we asked ourselves, why is that? And that led to the founding of Elusiv, which is now Arcium.
Amazing. Yeah. So would you say that the university itself was also a good Kickstarter for your career then? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I hadn't gone to TUM, I probably wouldn't have met my two co-founders.
That's true.
And I mean, obviously being at TUM is super helpful in that sense because you have lots of talent, lots of people who are, especially on the technical side, very talented, who you can connect with then,
Amazing. So do you want to tell us more about Arcium and what it does exactly?
Yeah, sure. Although maybe you want to start with Elusiv first? Or?
Elusiv, sorry, yeah. Maybe you can also explain what the difference is. Like Elusiv, start with that,
Yeah, for sure. So what Elusiv basically was at the time is, leading on from my story before, the three things that we thought were holding back privacy adoption in blockchains was number one, cost. Basically using privacy solutions at the time was quite expensive and significantly more expensive than just sending money normally. Second was composability, and I think this is the most important one. Basically that you essentially have to choose, do I want to use a general purpose chain such as Ethereum, such as Solana, such as Arbitrum, for example? which has lots of different applications? Or do I want to use privacy, which is something like Zcash, but basically all you can do on there is send money back and forth, but not use a decentralized exchange, a lending protocol, NFTs, whatever. And the final one, and this one's I think even more, almost the most, super relevant today, is compliance. Basically that a lot of people were and still are afraid to use privacy solutions because they think that it might get them in trouble with regulators and things like that. So essentially those are the three key factors that we tried to solve with Elusiv initially. And so for cost, this one was to some extent not that hard to solve by building directly on Solana, because for listeners that might not know, Solana has, I think still today, some of the cheapest transaction fees on any blockchain altogether. So basically almost anything that you will build on there in terms of transaction fees is going to be super affordable, which was the case for us as well. Composability, I think this is the one where we somewhat failed. Essentially, we wanted to build a system whereby you can have private assets and use those together with any existing smart contract and have native integration. We did a semi-okay job with this, I think. Like we had private payments and we also had private swaps. However, those weren't fully perfect, and I'll get to that in a second about why we switched to Arcium. And the final one, compliance. We basically had some pretty cool compliance tooling, which essentially allowed you to prove, the source of your funds, viewing keys with which you could prove for your taxes or something like that, allow someone else to decrypt your transactions. Or also we were building out something called Zeus, which was a decentralized compliance network using MPC, Multiparty Computation. But yeah, we worked on those for a pretty long time. But then at some point came to the realization that with ZK, Zero Knowledge, which was the technology that we were using to generate privacy on Elusiv, to some extent, you're inherently limited in the types of private applications that you can build and that you need to extend on that. And this is going to be a little bit technical, but I think it's quite interesting. The reason that you're inherently limited is because of the way that ZK works. Like the way that you generate privacy with ZK. Actually, before I explain that, is that interesting?
Super interesting. Okay. Yes, please go on.
Okay. So basically the way that you generate privacy using ZK is that you say, okay, I'm going to build a smart contract. And inside of my smart contract, I essentially have what's called a Merkle tree. And a Merkle tree is just like a way to organize data so you can efficiently retrieve it. And so basically the way that you then generate privacy in order to anonymize your public key from which you're sending funds, for example, is that you say, I take some amount of money and I take a secret value that I generate and that I tell to nobody. Then what you do is you hash the secret value and you essentially submit this hash to your smart contract and store it in that Merkle tree. So basically store it in your smart contract together with your money. So then basically what the smart contract more or less remembers is it remembers, okay, there's this hash and this hash has this much money associated with it. Then later on, you can use a technology called zero knowledge proofs to do something really cool with this setup. So quick tangent, what is a zero knowledge proof? A zero knowledge proof is essentially a mathematical primitive with which you can prove that you know something without actually revealing what that thing is. So for me, when I first heard this, I thought this was like quite weird. Like how would you prove,
Yeah, it's counterintuitive.
Yeah, exactly. I think so too. So a nice example I heard somewhere is that, for example, think about where is Waldo, right? You have the page and you know somewhere's Waldo. And let's say I was to say to you, I know where Waldo is. Traditionally, the way you would prove that is you'd say, okay, prove it to me. And I'd say, well, here he is. And points on the page where he's located. However, the idea of zero knowledge proof is basically that you say, I want to prove to you that I know where Waldo is, but I don't want to actually reveal to you where he is on the page. And a way that I could do that, for example, is by taking a big piece of cardboard, like much bigger than the book, cutting out a tiny hole in there, and then basically holding up the book so that Waldo's face pokes through that little hole. And by me being able to do that, okay, I must know where Waldo is.
Found him, yes.
Exactly. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to hold up the book like that. But at the same time, you have no idea yourself where Waldo is, since I could be holding up the bottom part of the book or the middle part or the whatever. So obviously, you obviously know this as well, but this is not how the math works. But that's a little bit more complicated. But this is the main idea. And so back to the thing with our smart contract, we have a hash stored inside of our smart contract with some money. And then what we basically do is we generate a zero knowledge proof that basically says, I know what the secret value is that was stored inside one of these hashes, but I won't tell you what that secret value is. And then basically you can submit this on-chain via somebody else. So basically I can give, for example, you my zero-knowledge proof, and you can submit that on-chain, and then essentially have access to those funds to send to someone else. And I think the key thing to realize here is that through this, we're essentially able to spend money without ever having to provide a signature, which is generally how you move funds and invoke smart contracts in a blockchain, which is also how your privacy gets leaked. So yeah, that's basically how Elusiv works, in case that makes sense.
Totally makes sense, yeah. I mean, Lucas is also a big fan of it. He told me several times already.
Yeah, I mean, zero knowledge proofs. It's a fascinating technology, right? Yeah. And you've used this extensively here, and there's so many cool things you can do with this. But there was also when you started working on this, right? Getting zero knowledge proofs to work on Solana was a bit of a challenge, I understand, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And the reasoning behind this is, logically, one might also think, wait, were we really the first people in the world to think, oh, having privacy tooling on Solana might be useful? Of course not. I'm sure, before, because at this point Solana had been around for maybe 1.5 years or 2 years already. I'm sure other people had this idea too. However, what really holds you back from building zero-knowledge proofs on Solana was on the engineering side. Because if you look at Ethereum, generally when you think about zero knowledge and this type of technology, Ethereum has made quite some progress on this. Like more technical viewers might know that Ethereum supports precompiles. So essentially, it's sort of syscalls or library functions inside of smart contracts to efficiently verify zero knowledge proofs. Solana had none of that when we started, which basically meant our initial version was gated by our capabilities to actually make it work. And in Solana there's this expression called chewing glass, which basically means just putting going all in until you finally figure it out somehow, and that's basically what we did. I mean, unfortunately I don't think there's like something I can say like, oh, when we had this big unlock and this big idea and that made everything easy. It really wasn't like that. It was really just like grinding away at it for months until at some point the solution emerged. So yeah.
And what was the timeline here, right? So you were basically you were eating burritos. You had this idea, and then so how did that go from there? When did you have your first ready working prototype? What was the process there?
Yeah, so basically the next day. No, I'm just joking. No, so basically the way it went is that after that we started building away at it, and I think in March or something like this, we had a first like semi-functional, like barely functional MVP prototype. So about like 3 months or something like that, I would say. We started at the start of the year. 3 months to have like a super buggy but somewhat working to verify zero knowledge proofs on chain. And then the way it actually went to blow up to some extent was that we thought it was just some fun prototype, something to build around with at the start. We didn't even plan it to become like a full-fledged protocol or company or anything. But then we posted it on Twitter. And then suddenly, since no one had built something like this before, people started commenting under it and they were like, oh, this is super cool, where can I use it, blah, blah, blah. And we were like, oh, okay, so there's demand for this. And then a little bit after that, since we got some traction on Twitter, someone from Solana Foundation reached out to us and basically told us, hey guys, we have a big conference coming up in Miami in April of this year. You guys should come by and and give a talk about this thing that you're building. And so we took that opportunity, flew out to Miami, and basically that's also where we met our fourth co-founder, Lucas, and essentially presented it on stage, thinking maybe some people might listen. And we might get some interesting feedback, but the reaction was actually the complete opposite. Like we got a standing ovation from that, and that's really what made us realize, okay, damn, this is something that people truly care about and people that truly want. So we should double down on this. Yeah, and that's what we did.
Amazing. No, I really love this story because it's also like I love this natural emergence of a company where you're starting with a need. And you're solving a problem and you're solving a problem and not start with a solution, trying to somehow sell it to some people, right? So this is really cool. And you touched a lot on also compliance, right? When you first talked about Elusiv, and that's sort of right. You didn't just implement private payments, right? You implemented private payments And on top of that, you had Zeus, right? If I
Zeus, correct, yeah.
remember that correctly, which allowed you to bring actually compliance to private payments, right?
Yeah, correct. So Zeus actually stands for Zero Knowledge Encryption for User Safeguarding. Sounds a little clunky, but Zeus sounds much better, I think.
Yeah.
And basically the idea behind Zeus was that we say, okay, so allowing this private transfer thing using zero knowledge proofs is pretty cool, but unfortunately, leaves you vulnerable to bad actors misusing the protocol. And then, of course, from there's two avenues that you can go. So, or at least at the time, there was two avenues that you can go. The first was basically to say, okay, we don't care about that, which is not something that we want to do, because at the end of the day, like, we want to build a platform that helps, the everyday people have better privacy. But we still want to prevent, essentially, we still want to provide some ways to prevent misuse of our platform. And the other way that you can go is basically to say, okay, we KYC everyone, but at that point, it's basically, why are we building a blockchain protocol in the first place? At this point, using PayPal would just be easier. And so for that reason, we thought really hard and tried to come up with something that, doesn't ruin user experience completely, but at the same time also provides a decentralized way to defend against bad actors. And what we came up with was Zeus. And the idea behind Zeus was basically to say, every time you hash something on chain, you create a private balance. Your balance and your transactions and whatnot, aside from getting hashed and encrypted with your own keys, also get encrypted with another special key, which is essentially held by a distributed set of nodes that essentially then have the ability, if they would all agree, to decrypt certain specific transactions. However, if we just left it at that wouldn't be that ideal, because then you basically have to say, okay, we have to trust this network of nodes. And you also have the problem that every time, if at any point they reconstructed their key, you have to basically make sure, like, where do you reconstruct this key? Because if that person then, just keeps that key instead of discarding it, they would be able to decrypt everything inside of Elusiv, which is a huge risk. So for that reason, the technology came to mind that we're using at Arcium now, which is called MPC, Multiparty Computation, which basically allows you to say, we take a key, we distribute it over a set of nodes, and then instead of, when we say we want to decrypt something, instead of saying, okay, we decrypt it and then we do with the data what we want, we can say we have a fixed protocol where only under certain rules, certain amounts of data get revealed, which essentially allows us to say, we can have on-chain voting where we say who agrees that this transaction should get decrypted, and then we can execute off-chain and be sure that really only the transaction that everyone agreed to decrypt gets decrypted, rather than having to invest a lot of trust in these nodes.
Yeah, cool. And this sort of really, I think this nicely also brings us to sort of what you also just mentioned, to very recent announcement of you, I think only last week, announced this, where you basically now, can I say, pivot a little bit, and now sort of use this technology of the multi-party computation to build something new, right? Maybe you can sort of, I think you can probably explain it better than me. So why don't you just explain? So your new company, you did a rebranding, Arcium. Maybe you just briefly explain what Arcium is. Yeah,
for sure. So Arcium isn't necessarily a new company. So the people that built Elusiv, are still the same. It's still the same team.
That's why I called it Arcium and not Elusiv earlier.
Sorry?
Because that's what I call it. Why I call it Arcium and not Elusiv earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Still in my mind.
It's still the same team, and more importantly, it's still the exact same mission to bring privacy to the masses through Web3. However, as you mentioned, the means of achieving this have shifted a little bit, because I think earlier I mentioned that with ZK, to some extent, you're constrained in what kind of privacy you can provide. And this is basically what we want to solve with Arcium. And the way that you're constrained is that, as mentioned, with ZK, the idea is always you take some data that's available in plain text, you encrypt it, or you hash it, or you obfuscate it in some other manner, and then later on, you generate a zero-knowledge proof, where you basically say, I know what the plain text looks like of this encrypted or hashed or whatever data, And because I know what the plaintext looks like, that proves that I'm the one who owns this encrypted data. And because I just proved that I own it, I'm allowed to change it or do some action. The problem is, most smart contracts have shared states. And let me give an example I think it's easier to explain. Let's say we have a decentralized exchange, which has an order book. So should I explain what an order book is, or do you think everyone's familiar with that?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so basically, the way many exchanges work is if you say I have ETH Sol, for example, in a market, you have many ways of building this, but one is using an order book where basically, if I say I want to buy this much Sol at this price, there's like a big book in which I can then write in, okay, I want to buy 100 Sol at the price of whatever ETH. And then other people can basically say, who are selling ETH, for example, they can also write on the other side of the book, oh, I want to sell this much ETH at this current price, for example. And then what the order book takes care of is it has the list of what everyone wants to buy and what everyone wants to sell. And then it basically looks in the middle, okay, which people are trying to sell at the same price and trying to buy at the same price. And if it's the same, it executes the trade. In practice, it's a lot more complicated, but this is basically the main idea.
Yeah.
And let's say we want to build this on-chain using zero-knowledge proofs in a private manner so that not everyone can see what orders are written. This wouldn't really be possible because you would start out and you'd say, okay, I have my order, I encrypt it with my key, and I put it on-chain. Okay, cool. Then let's say you have your order as well, which is a sell order, for example. You encrypt it with your key and you put it on-chain. Okay, cool. Now the problem is, how do we now find out that our orders can actually match? That's impossible because even if I were to generate a zero-knowledge proof where I say, I know what my order looks like, it doesn't help anyone because we would need everyone to generate a zero-knowledge proof where they give some information about their order to be able to execute a match. But this obviously doesn't scale if you have a lot of users and is super annoying for everyone to use. So for that reason, you need something where you can have encrypted data and essentially operate on this encrypted data directly without requiring the plaintext to be present somewhere. And this is basically what MPC enables and what we're trying to build with Arcium. Because with Arcium, the vision is really to say ultimate composability. Basically, any smart contract that you can build on Solana or any blockchain today, you can build the exact same way, or at least almost the exact same way, on Arcium on an existing blockchain. Yeah.
So that's how it came to the rebranding.
Exactly, because this was a tough decision for sure, but the idea behind the rebranding was for the most part just that otherwise, to some extent, there was always going to be some level of confusion with people being like, wait, I thought Elusiv was this, now it's doing this.
It was a clear statement that now you're doing another step and it's...
Yeah, basically just, that we're doing more general private compute rather than simply private payments and private swaps,
I love that example. Maybe you can give some more. I looked on your website and you have some really cool use cases there. Maybe to give some more people who are not that technical in this to give a better understanding of what you can actually build with this.
Yeah, for sure. So so basically first there's a lot of use cases that we thought about that would be really cool to build with this. So the first one is what the main use case of blockchains are today is basically private DeFi. So decentralized finance, so that means decentralized exchanges where you can't see everyone's orders, lending, for example, so that if you take a loan to buy the newest shitcoin or something, that not the entire world needs to know about that. This type of thing, obviously. I think that's the most straightforward one. But there's some other ones that I think are almost even more interesting, but maybe lie a little bit further in the future still. Which result from the fact that the way MPC, multi-party computation, the primitive that we use, works under the hood is, as mentioned, that you still say at the core is this idea of saying you have multiple participants and they can essentially combine their data, in most cases a key, but it can also be other data, under certain rules and then execute certain computations on this without leaking any of that data. And this is especially interesting for things like AI training, for example. For the reason that in AI training, you frequently might have the setup that you say, there's 10 different companies who are all competitors to each other, and they all have proprietary data. So obviously they don't want to send their data to their competitors, because otherwise their competitors can just look at their data and do whatever. And of course, here, in Germany, we also have GDPR, which probably also causes problems with that. Whereas with MPC, what you can then basically say is you can say these 10 companies can collaborate to train an AI model on all of their data, which means they can create a much better model without ever having to reveal that data to one another, which I think is quite promising. So yeah,
it's fascinating. It's a really amazing technology. Because also, I mean, there's also the way I first heard about multi-party computation was this I think, which is a very typical example. You have a group of people who want to know who earns the most without revealing how much they actually earn, right? You have, and this is something that multi-party computation actually allows you to do, right? You can basically, without revealing your salary, check, okay, who's making the most money, but there's also, so in the first iterations you had in the two-person setting, right? You had these garbled circuits, but they also add a lot of overhead to your computation, right? And for example, the example you brought with machine learning is something that's quite also compute intensive, but you're using a somewhat different technology under the hood. So you're not using garbled circuit, but you're using something really interesting. Maybe you can go into that a little bit more, because some of the technical challenges there also.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, essentially what we use is additive secret shares, and more concretely, the protocol that we use is BDOZ, or rather that's what it's called, but it's spelled BDOZ. Yeah, I think explaining too much on that might be a little bit too technical, but I think touching on which technical challenges arise when building this type of thing might be interesting to speak about. So obviously, as you said, the first thing is that MPC sort of gets a bad rep for being slow to some extent. Because the problem that you have with MPC is that since you have multiple parties who, as the name says, multi-party computation, compute some function together, that means you have a lot of overhead in terms of communication between different parties. And essentially to solve this, there is no silver bullet, but there's essentially two vitamins that you can take to do this. So the first one is when you have an MPC, what is called an MPC circuit, basically a computation that you want to execute in your multi-party computation network. There's certain ways that you can essentially format in what order those computations are executed in order to minimize the amount of communication overhead. For example, in additive secret shares, additions can be computed locally without having to talk to others, but multiplications require talking to others. So for that reason, you want to do your things in such a way that you can parallelize as many multiplications as possible, and obviously in your code generate as many additions as possible. And essentially the way that you make that happen is by having, which we are very fortunate to have, extremely strong cryptography engineers. Which we're very lucky that we were able to find some great people who work together with us. We're basically working on optimizing this every day. While I'm doing podcasts.
Someone from TBC Blockchain Club is actually working.
That's true. So exactly. Yeah? Someone. Am I allowed to mention his name or?
Of course.
Yes. Tobias. He might be on some other podcast or not. I don't know. Who's from TBC Blockchain Club? Yeah, exactly. He works with us as well. He actually works on optimizing exactly what I said on this multi-party computation library. So yeah, he's doing a great job over there as well. Next, I think another difficulty that arises is basically how do you oftentimes, trust to some extent, is the hardest problem in cryptography. How do you establish trust? In a blockchain setting, everything's 10 times harder to some extent in this, because if you use just multi-party computation and you kind of know to some extent everyone that you're computing your thing with. For example, like I said earlier, if you're just 5 companies and you take out the blockchain aspect and you say you want to compute something together, like an AI model or salaries or whatever it may be. In this case, you don't really have to worry too much about someone, for example, on purpose submitting garbage data, which would then mess up the whole computation. Because if someone does that, you're like, hey, stop doing that, and you have the social barriers to essentially take care of that. Yeah. In blockchain, it's more complicated because the whole idea is that we provide a decentralized network of nodes that run off-chain. And so that means it's not always obvious who is who, and who to blame and how to blame them and so on. So for this reason, you need to combine that with a way to essentially, you need to combine that with a way to to enforce trust and reputation and things like this. And for this, we had a lot of ideas centered on like staking, slashing, things like that, but also just in the way that we set up our network. I think like the details of this again might be going a bit too far. However, if you go to our website, docs.arcium.com, we have a lot of interesting ideas there. If people are technically interested, feel free to take a look and tell us if you have a better idea for something.
Also, I think maybe here to mention, because Arcium is not a blockchain, right? It's a compute network on top of it, because I think that's also maybe something people who are in the, I don't know, maybe there's a tendency to say, okay, this is a network, okay, maybe it's a blockchain, right? It's a compute network.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, actually, because that's an incredibly important distinction. Because, the distinction is basically that we say you can still write smart contracts, you can still write programs directly on Solana. You have your encrypted states directly on Solana. The only thing that changes is that when you want to edit this encrypted state, since Solana natively obviously doesn't support that, this happens off-chain using a compute network provided, which is basically what Arcium is. And this is a conscious decision for the reason that obviously we could have also gone the path of saying, okay, we do everything from scratch. We build a new blockchain, new consensus, new smart contract framework, whatever. And this would have made some things easier. But at the end of the day, this, in my opinion, building new L1s should be avoided as much as possible. It's just for the reason that if you look at basically the most popular blockchain systems in place today are, EVM-based systems. So like still ETH L1, Arbitrum, ZK Sync, and some of these other rollups, and Solana. And Solana is basically the only one that isn't directly, EVM connected, that still has a high amount of volume. I think, And the reason for that is that, obviously I might be a little bit biased, but I would say Solana in many ways is to some extent superior to ETH just because it's faster, cheaper, whatever. But the thing is, this value proposition is also given by a million other chains. Why does no one use these? First mover advantage. Everyone's used to using EVM. Everyone's used to the tooling on there. There's, much more things already exist over there. So that means when you're first getting started, it's just, easier to build on that. So that's essentially what we want to go after with Arcium as well. Basically not saying, okay, again, you have to choose between using your favorite protocols on Solana or, everything being very underdeveloped on Arcium still. Rather, we want to say, okay, you can continue using Solana as close as possible to how you're already doing it, but we sort of give you the superpower of having encrypted states on Solana.
So you don't think there could be another blockchain that will have a breakthrough?
Oh, I'm sure there could be. There is a lot of stuff coming up. Like for example, one I'm personally quite excited about outside of Arcium, obviously, is Monad, which is building a parallelized, parallelized version of the EVM. However, that again, I think a lot of its potential comes from the fact that it's EVM still, because everyone's used to EVM. So I think to build something with a fully new VM from scratch, which is something that Sui or Aptos are doing and are having some success with still, is extremely difficult to gain adoption with. But I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's very difficult. So
Speaking of other networks, this obviously also isn't limited to Solana, right? So this you can sort of port this to other blockchain networks, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That's the other advantage of this as well, because if we say all that really is relevant is having this off-chain network that performs confidential computations, this can easily be adapted to saying, okay, we manage our private state not on Solana, but on Ethereum or on Arbitrum or on whatever. Yeah.
Cool. Is there any other technical topic that we should discuss? That we should touch on?
I don't think so.
Maybe outside the technical topics, going back a bit to the applications, what I found really interesting were also the medical applications, sort of, right? Computing on, because patient data is something that's super confidential and where everyone rightfully is very careful about. That's also something you mentioned on your website, which I personally find a really interesting use case there.
I think that goes in the same direction as on one hand AI to some extent, being able to collaboratively train on medical data. But on the other side, I think, the reason we have that on our website is because like, in terms of what data there is, medical data is probably one of the ones on, highest on the list of data you don't necessarily want to reveal to the whole world. But I think next to medical data, another thing that goes in the same direction is identity as well. Because, if you want to put your passport on chain, for example, like today, completely impossible because, you could say, oh, I mint an NFT, and that in its metadata field has, my passport number, my name, date of birth, stuff like that. Obviously, no one in their right mind would do this today because, you don't necessarily want that information visible to the whole entire world. However, using our network, we think there's quite a good application as well, where you could say, okay, I have all this data on chain, but it's all encrypted and only gets revealed or used under certain preconditions. So definitely think there's a lot of potential as well.
Yeah, amazing. No, I think this is really interesting because it opens up a completely new dimension of use cases, right? It's always been the whole Web3 space is always seen very synonymously also with blockchain, but it's a lot more than this, right? There's so much you can do with these all these cryptographic primitives that are now being further and further developed, and I think this is a really cool use case of it.
So how is Arcium used today?
So today it's not used at all because we're still in private testnet. But that means for people who are interested, if you go to our website, we have a form where you can sign up for the private testnet, and that means you can be one of the first to deploy a program on Arcium or to run an off-chain node that runs these multi-party computations.
So when will it be ready and not on a testnet anymore?
I don't think I'm supposed to publicly say that yet. So,
No, that's okay.
So, can you give like a range of like, is it a year away? Is it 5 years away? What's just like an approximate timeline?
Yeah, within our lifetimes for sure.
Within our lifetimes, all right.
No.
That is good.
We plan to have a public testnet and a mainnet still within the year. Yeah.
Oh, okay, amazing.
Yeah, then we will see it soon. So
looking forward to it.
Super cool. So what I would be super interested about is also like your fundraising journey for the company. I mean, I can expect that founding this company also costs a lot of money. And how did you deal with this? How was the journey?
Yeah, actually, that's quite interesting as well because, going back to, we were in Miami, we pitched this thing, saw that there was a lot of interest. And for those who have been in blockchain a little bit longer, you might remember that April, I think it was 2022, so 2 years ago at this point, was a bull market as well. And it was actually like, I think if you look on the chart, it was basically the peak or right before the peak. So it meant at that time, VCs were basically throwing money around. So that meant, we gave our pitch and we went off the stage and, tons of VCs came up to us and they were like, yeah, we'll give you this much money, blah, blah, blah. And we were like, awesome, this is going to be so easy to raise funding. But then, the way I'm telling the story, you can probably see it coming. Since we were just building as a hobby project, we didn't have the entities or anything like that set up. Which meant that still took some time to, set up the entities, blah, blah, so that we can actually accept money. And the time that took was exactly the remaining amount of time in the bull market, which meant that basically by the time we had all our entities ready and were ready to accept, the money from investors and whatnot, all crypto had dropped like, 50% or 70% in value, which meant we went back to these VCs and asked them, okay, so about the money you want to invest. And they were like, never mind. But to some extent, I think this is actually a good thing that it happened like this, because every time if you look at bull markets, like I don't want to, throw shade at any specific company with this, but you always see these projects that raise, atrocious amounts of money, throw it around because they think it'll always be like that. And then within, a year or two, are out of money because they never really had to work for it to some extent. So for us, basically, I think it really toughened us up because after that, for the next 6 months, we still continued fundraising because, regardless if it was bull or bear, like for us, we still saw this being a, huge potential play. And we're very lucky to find some awesome investors, for example, one that we're sitting in the office in right now, staking facilities, who, just like us, believed in the vision, didn't, care that much if it was bear or bull market. They still believed blockchain was going to be a thing in the future. And basically, supported us in our journey and helped us raise our first round. And then basically we built out Elusiv, had some good success with that. And then as we essentially came to this junction where we realized, essentially made the difficult decision of saying, okay, with ZK, we'll always be limited to some extent, and we want to build something even bigger that addresses all possible use cases, not just payments. We again realized that raising some more money for this would be necessary because it's a big endeavor to expand from one specific app to building a whole network that's supposed to power ideally hundreds, if not thousands of apps. For this reason, raised some funding again quite recently. I think we announced it last week.
And some big names in there too, right?
No, we had some big names. We were led by a Greenfield, who are awesome guys. They're Germany based as well, for any TUM students. We had Coinbase Ventures as well, and of course we were lucky to have continued support from our existing investors, such as staking facilities, such as Longhash, and many others who've been insanely helpful in our journey so far. I think on this, expanding on this a little bit actually, I think what's quite important, if any listeners are currently in the setting of raising money or are planning to raise money at some point in the future, it's, of course you hear this advice a lot where people say, oh, don't just worry about the money, also make sure that, or the name, make sure that the investor is actually on board with what you're doing, or, because this sounds like a no-brainer. Of course, no one wants to, get in fights with their investor and whatnot. But this is really something I want to reiterate as being super important because, for us, for example, when we decided to pivot to building Arcium, having investors who really believed in the bigger picture and this journey of saying, we want to build privacy for Web3 altogether, proved to be incredibly important, and especially investors who are long-term minded, because that meant, they saw the vision, they saw where we were coming from and continued to support us, which is something that you always want to have, because ideally, investors should not just be people who give you money, but really people who you can come to for any type of advice, be that technical, operational, strategic, whatever. So, yeah.
They will still invest when the market is not supporting it. So that's a good thing,
Yeah.
So it was how does it work in the team? I'm interested in, you're all technical developers, I guess, or?
Not all, in terms of founders or in terms of team in general?
How big is your team, by the way?
So we are currently 15 people,
That's a small team, is it?
Yeah, quite small, although for blockchain terms, it's...
Okay.
Yeah.
And, so fundraising, how does it work in the blockchain space? Is it that you talk with people that really know what's going on, or is it still only the vision that you have to pitch there? How does it work?
So generally speaking, basically the way that you usually go about raising money typically is that nowadays in blockchains I'm saying this with the assumption that you're not a professor from Stanford or something. If you're a professor from Stanford, there's probably different ways to go about it, but I wouldn't be able to tell them to you because I'm not anyway. If you're someone like me, essentially the way that you should best go about it is build an initial prototype or an initial MVP that showcases what you want to build and how you want to expand it, and have a damn good plan of how you want to expand it. And then basically the next step, at least what worked for us so far, is attend conferences, because that's generally where investors will go to go see new and upcoming projects, go see new and upcoming founders. And ideally, most ecosystems nowadays have some type of hackathons or competitions or something, and competing in those, I think is something that we did as well. At the time in Miami, there was a hackathon going on. I think we won second place or something like that in that one, which is really helpful for two reasons. The first reason is obviously it gets you exposure, makes investors see that you're building something. But the second reason, I think this is way more important, is it shows that you're actually on the right track. Because if you're building something for a hackathon and literally no one cares, that probably means you're building something that's not that useful. Of course, if you're very much convinced in it, you shouldn't listen to my advice or anyone's advice. Maybe compete in a few more hackathons or talk to some more users. But I think before fundraising, you really should make sure that what you're building is something you're passionate about and is something that actually has promise. Because otherwise, even if you raise money, what's going to end up happening is you're going to be, to some extent, stuck in a startup job, working long hours and working very hard on something that you're not passionate about. Yeah. And, even though this idea of being a startup founder is romanticized to some extent nowadays, Fortunately, I'm not in that position, but I've heard from other people, being a startup founder in a company where you don't care about your product and, aren't passionate about your field is probably the worst job ever. So, yeah. But anyway, you go to conferences, you first speak to investors. If there's some interest there, they will probably set up a call with you. You have to learn how to pitch them, practice that. There's courses online and whatnot. And if that goes well, usually what ends up happening, especially if you're building a technical product like ours, is they usually have some technical experts on their side too. Yeah. You end up speaking to those. And then from then on, it's basically just using those few investors that you met at a conference, hopefully getting, a lead or one of them being interested in your project. And if that's the case, you can essentially leverage those to get connections to other investors, because basically all investors in crypto know each other.
There's still a lot of potential as well, right? So, starting now, if you have a hackathon project or anything, if you want to start now, it's still a good time, would you say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just look, I think that just shows by, this is an unfortunate, but for people who want to start, a fortunate thing by how little, to some extent, crypto adoption is so far. I think right now it's probably, actually, wait, can you ask that again? Because I kind of got lost in what I was saying.
So I was asking, if you do a hackathon and you have a project, if you're still looking for fundraising, if you're looking still for funds, is it a good time now to start?
Yeah, for sure. Although I think you should still view it more from the standpoint of, if you have a good project, pursuing it, whether pursuing it in general makes sense. I don't think fundraising should ever be the main thing that you think about, right? Because for us, we didn't fundraise just because we thought, it would be so cool to, have these guys in our cap table and be able to say, hey, we're funded by whatever. At the end of the day, what you really need to care about is building a product that actually has an impact on the world and is something that you're passionate about. And for that, I think, right now is the perfect time to start because,
Because?
Because I still think crypto has tons of potential. Because if you look at, because traditionally, right now we're in Germany, right? And if you speak to people in Europe or in Northern America, for example, crypto unfortunately gets a bit of a bad rep because they say, this is useless. This is just something that's used to trade meme coins or whatever, And unfortunately, that's something that's used quite a bit for nowadays. However, if you travel a bit to, for example, Southeast Asia or Africa or places or South America, for example, places that don't have as stable of a traditional financial system as we do, the use cases for cryptocurrencies are immediately obvious. For example, stablecoins, USDT, does insane amounts of volume and has clear product market fit in countries such as these, where you don't have easy access to to stable currencies, but you still want to be able to save your money. Or anyone that has friends in a different country, or even worse, in a different continent, and has tried to send them money, probably instantly noticed a use case for crypto where you can click one button, don't have to do anything extra, and the money instantly arrives. However, on this tangent, something that I think is still holding back crypto in Europe or America or places like this is that there obviously the pain isn't as great as in some other places I described, because even though a lot of people like to complain about banks, for example, in Germany, more or less it works relatively well. The euro and the US dollar and whatnot are relatively stable. If you have your savings in that, you lose some money to inflation, but it's not like you're going to lose 50% of your money overnight or something like that. And at the same time, getting a bank account isn't super complicated, and setting it up with PayPal or whatever isn't that hard either. Whereas on the other side, using crypto at the moment brings some significant pain with it with regards to having to figure out how everything works and essentially not having privacy. Mm-hmm. And for me, those are the two things that are basically holding it back at the moment. Privacy on one hand, which is why I'm working on it. If you set up a bank account, you don't want to tell the entire world how much you earn. If you go to an ATM, you wouldn't want that ATM to loudly proclaim to the world, hey, he just withdrew this much money. No one will use that ATM. But on the other side, I think intents are also a really big thing, which is basically this idea of, you say, I have some US dollars and I want to swap them for Sol or ETH as an investment, for example. Right now, if you want to do that on the blockchain directly, you have to figure out, okay, which protocol do I want to use? how do I connect my wallet to this protocol? Mm-hmm. Oh wait, is this one better? Is this one better? Like price and all this stuff. The idea of intent is basically that you make it as close as possible to traditional finance, where you just basically tell the app, okay, I have US dollars and I want them to be swapped into ETH, for example, and the app takes care of the rest for you under the hood. Mm-hmm. I think projects that go in these two directions will have a lot of potential and success in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There was one more interesting thing in Alex's question before, because there's also been, just in terms of what's possible, there's been a lot of development, right? Technologically, we're in a very different place now than 15 years ago, and what you're building is really on the cutting edge and unexplored territory, right? Maybe you can shine some more light into that, because I think some of the people who are not that deep in crypto are actually not familiar with this. Or aware of this,
Yeah, could you elaborate that question?
Yeah, so I mean, when Bitcoin first came out, zero knowledge proofs were very far from being mm-hmm. production ready. So there's been a lot of development in that direction that made these protocols only feasible today.
Yeah, that's a great point, because if you kind of look at what some of the biggest projects over the last years have been, especially like recent years, a lot of them have basically been focused on infrastructure, because mm-hmm. inherently building on a blockchain is not as easy as building a traditional system, because you have different trust assumption, it's all decentralized, and a million other issues that mm-hmm. anyone who's built on a blockchain before probably knows about. However, in terms of this, as you rightfully said, blockchain has made tons of progress in terms of optimizing what type of computations are possible, in terms of research in cryptography, and what types of core primitives are possible today. And of course, in terms of DeFi, I'm not as deep into the whole DeFi and financial and whatnot stuff. However, there's been amazing breakthrough there as well with regards to how markets operate, especially in a decentralized manner. So I think now, again, coming back to my point about intents, like now really is a prime time of saying, okay, we have all this amazing infrastructure, all these amazing primitives. How can we actually, make them accessible in such a way so that your average person can use them without having to actually understand how all of them work? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that point. I think maybe more people will get interested then as well. Because as you said, it's not so accessible to everybody that doesn't understand all the technical parts of it. But yeah, looking forward. Will be amazing. Maybe you can also say what excites you really generally about Web3, the space of it, and why should the world care still about Web3?
Yeah, so for myself, being like a rather technical person, one thing that excites me personally about building on Web3 is that essentially when I first started out and I was working at this trust execution environment company and learned a bunch of stuff about cryptography. At first, what I wanted to do is I thought, okay, I want to become a cryptographer and I want to learn all about cryptography. And this is still something I'm extremely interested in. And yeah, however, as I was looking more and more into it and was studying it and whatnot, I realized a lot of cryptography, unfortunately, remains quite theoretical. Like, for example, for MPC and zero knowledge, the first protocols that implemented this came out in the 90s or even earlier in some cases. However, no one really ever did anything with it because cryptography, generally speaking, you have your core primitives like encryption, signing and whatnot, and those get an overhaul every 10, 15, 20 years or something, because there's so much time spent on perfecting them because they support the security of the internet today. And of course, I'm not saying this is wrong. However, the thing that's quite interesting about blockchain personally, for me at least, on a research side, is that people in crypto ship incredibly fast. Like, you'll see someone publish a paper about some new zero knowledge primitive, for example, and within a couple months or within a couple weeks even in some cases, someone will have implemented it and will have even built a protocol on top of it, and it will be available to you. Of course, again, there's flip sides to this. Sometimes it might mean that things are done not as nicely as they could be. But on the other side, it just means that everything moves a lot faster, and especially for people interested in math and cryptography and cutting edge technology in general, this is your chance to really get involved and not have to keep building the same systems that already exist, but really get to build something new. However, more broadly, for people who maybe aren't as technical, just in general, I think blockchain still has the potential to, and is currently doing it, just not worldwide yet, revolutionize financial systems as a whole. just for the reason that for the longest time, you always had the system of having to entrust everything to banks and everything to the traditional financial system. And if you look at over the past couple of years, so many industries have been disrupted. However, finance really, outside of some things like Venmo and PayPal, has stayed more or less the same. And this is basically your chance to get involved in something where you can disrupt an entire industry that's been the same for decades at this point. So I think that's extremely exciting.
So how does somebody start now, today?
That depends if you're, let me think about that one sec. Yeah, I think the easiest way to start is basically just, get interested, try out some protocols that exist. If you live in a city or nearby one, try to attend some meetups, speak to some people who are interested in it. If not, you can also, there's huge online communities centered around crypto, try getting interested in those. And ideally, if you do those things, most likely you'll quickly, gain knowledge and run into people who are passionate about it and can leverage those connections to, go full time if you're interested in that.
Yeah, so just a quick question regarding meetups. We were sitting in Munich in the Staking Facilities office. What does the Munich ecosystem bring in the Web3 blockchain space? Like, is it big? Is it small? Is there nobody? Can you tell us what's the state?
Yeah, so Munich ecosystem, unfortunately, for Web3 isn't quite as big, for Germany at least, as the one in Berlin yet. However, I think there's great strides being made on this because, you have staking facilities where OGs in the space who are in Munich. You have Arcium, for example. You have some newcomers like us, and there's, a couple other startups coming out of Munich, especially with the amount of talent being produced by TUM. And then, of course, there's, student initiatives like you guys, TUM Blockchain Club, who are doing their best to help Munich become a more and more vibrant Web3. So I think at the moment, being totally honest, I probably have to say Munich is second after Berlin when it comes to Web3 ecosystem. But I think we have a great trajectory to become number one in Germany, or at least I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Cool. Lucas, do you have any questions left?
Maybe one weird question because I knew this from Tobias. So I heard you're a big fan of bullet train. Can you tell us about that?
So basically there's a movie called Bullet Train, which features Brad Pitt and which is from 2021 or something like this. And it's basically the lowest denominator movie possible. It's about like a bunch of spies on a train together, on a bullet train, as the title implies. Lots of funny things happen to it. And I would say like this is really like Arcium heritage to some extent. Like it's really a key part of their culture for the reason that I myself have seen that movie probably like 20 times or something like that. Because every time I travel to a conference, somehow I watch it on the plane. That plays into me mentioning to the rest of the team, them having watched it too, us making jokes about it, little tidbits here and there. And I think, more broadly, like expanding on this, I think this just plays into what's also important in Web3, having, good company culture, or in any startup, to be honest. Having this level of connection with your teammates where you can make jokes about this, tell them about your day and whatnot.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's a fun community too.
Yeah, exactly. That too, definitely.
Yeah, I'm gonna watch the movie today, I think. So we can make joke about it. Thank you so much. It was super interesting to hear about Arcium, and I hope to see it not only on the testnet but on the mainnet at the end of the year, maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.